As Washington, D.C.'s central library, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library serves D.C. residents from every neighborhood and culture in our city, with offerings ranging from makers labs to town halls, co-working to concerts. We go well beyond books. Here, artists and activists, teachers and learners, toddlers and seniors converge to explore our city's past and the infinite potential of its future. Because the MLK Library is not only a place to be quiet, it is a place to be heard, to be understood. It is a place to explore the possibility of all we can be. It is a place to just be. Welcome to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, celebrating 50 years as Washington, D.C.'s first memorial to Dr. King.
Good evening. There we go. So my name's Tony Williams. In this city, I am the other Tony Williams, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Board of Trustees of DC Public Libraries to the MLK Library for this fantastic event. We are excited tonight to have a true icon in the house to discuss his new book, The Many Lives of Andrew Young. So as we welcome Ambassador Young, I feel like it's just so appropriate because in so many ways, this library, the MLK Library, is so symbolic of the world that Ambassador Young has built. You know, of course, I'm referring to his role leading the civil rights movement. For those of you, when you walked in today, you saw this fantastic mural, and Ambassador Young is the only living member who is still on that mural, who led that civil rights movement and who was part of that tremendous moment in history. But I also am talking about his movement from the streets to the halls of power and into the boardroom. He showed the world that, and particularly the business world, that you could have success by investing in black cities. Turning Hartsfield-Jackson Airport into an international airport, bringing that investment into Atlanta, and showing that Atlanta could be a city where business gets done, transform the way that business interacted with African-American-led cities, including DC. And when you look at the libraries that we have today, the investment that this city has, that is all in the legacy and tradition of Ambassador Young. Without that first step, we would not have this $200 million renovation that you're sitting in today. You would not be able to experience this wonderful auditorium. I hope you guys got to go outside and see the roof deck and the reading room. If not, please come back, spend some time in this fantastic library. I'd also like to thanks Ernie Suggs for joining us, talking about his book, for the work that he put in, and of course Suzanne Malveaux for joining us to moderate this fantastic panel. And finally, on behalf of DC Public Library, I would also like to thank the DC Public Library Foundation, as well as Mahogany Books for partnering with us on this event. So with that, welcome again, and I hope you enjoy the program. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Leroy Clay, and I'm coming to you on behalf of the DC Public Library Foundation. Thank you, Tony Williams, and to the staff of the library for everything that you do. Scripture teaches us in Psalm 37 that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth himself in it. How fitting is it that in this place, a place named after Dr. King, that we are blessed to get a glimpse into the God-ordered steps of one of Dr. King's close friends and a co-laborer in the vineyard, Ambassador Andrew Young. The DC Public Library Foundation's role is to support the library by securing philanthropic funding to further advance the library's mission across the district and ensure world-class programming in our world-class facilities. For example, tonight, we were proud to purchase copies of Ambassador Young's book to provide the members of the public with free copies. In addition, through that purchase, we are also thrilled to support a local independent black business, the bookstore, Mahogany Books, who is a tremendous partner in making nights like tonight possible. And so we're very thankful to Mahogany Books. We're very thankful to the library. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ramonda Young, the owner of Mahogany Books. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Ramonda Young, owner and co-founder of Mahogany Books, along with my husband Derek and our daughter Mahogany. We are thrilled to partner with the MLK Library on special programming like tonight. And we look forward to continuing to be part of the library's celebration of its 50th anniversary. As an independent bookstore based in Washington, D.C., access to literature is very, very important to us. And we're always excited to collaborate with the D.C. Public Library. Immediately following tonight's conversation, please join us upstairs on the 5th floor to purchase your own copy of The Many Lives of Andrew Young. And if you're one of the first 30 who registered tonight, we're excited to give you a copy courtesy of the DC Public Library Foundation. So some of you have already gotten your books, which is phenomenal. And I just want to say thank you to Leroy and Rob Hartman at the foundation for being such wonderful partners. So now let's get into tonight's conversation. I am beyond thrilled to introduce this remarkable panel. Leading tonight's conversation is an accomplished journalist whose nearly 20-year career at CNN has seen exceptional highlights, breaking news, and award-winning coverage. From the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina to covering the war in Afghanistan, Suzanne Malveaux has interviewed them all in her role as national correspondent at CNN, including all five US presidents, countless political, civil, and human rights leaders, including tonight's featured leader, Ambassador Young. Best of all, she's a friend of the library, so please help me welcome the amazing Miss Suzanne Malveaux. As a 20-year race reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, his coverage extends from entertainment to civil rights and even voting rights. A recipient of the prestigious Harvard University Nieman Fellow, Ernie Suggs is also the former vice president of the National Association of Black Journalists. Tonight, he joins us as the author of The Many Lives of Andrew Young, the amazing book that you had in your hands. He is the author of that. DMV family, please help me welcome Mr. Ernie Suggs. And lastly, here to share with us many varied chapters of his own life, now available where books are sold, please rise and help me welcome the first African-American UN ambassador, the former mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, the diplomat, humanitarian, and leader, and a proud alum of the Howard University. Please help me welcome Mr. Ambassador Andrew Young.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. It really is a pleasure and a treat to be here at the DC Public Library. It's such a gorgeous building, and the facilities have really just drawn us all into this community of learning. And so we appreciate your time this evening, as well as those who are online for this important discussion. And I want to thank you, Ambassador Young. I know that you have been very active even through the COVID phase. I have seen you multiple times, as Ernie has as well, fighting for voting rights and economic empowerment. And so we appreciate your being here. We know you've traveled.
My pleasure.
And of course, Ernie Suggs, congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a beautiful, I don't know if you've read it, if you've seen it, it is a gorgeous book. It is an incredible collaboration between the two of you, and you should be very, very proud of your achievements.
I am.
I have to tell you, we have 45 minutes a discussion for the three of us, and then 15 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. So the ambassador and I have already discussed. I might interrupt a few times, and I apologize in advance. We're going to try to get through as much as possible in covering these topics this evening. But I want to start off with you, Ernie. I mean, you actually, the two of you came up from Atlanta. You
Yes.
flew together, and you've been doing this tour across the country. Tell me, how did you score this? I mean, how did you manage to develop this relationship and this collaboration? What was the first time when you met the ambassador?
Well, let me say, I think the relationship was solidified today at lunch when he was eating my French fries off of my plate. So then it was verified that he's my man. But I've been covering race and culture in Atlanta since 1997. And of course, Andrew Young is a central figure in that, living in Atlanta, being who he is. So I've known his work personally since 1997. However, growing up in New York City, my mother voted for Jimmy Carter in 1976. That was my first recollection of her voting for president, because I was a kid. And so Jimmy Carter became this kind of touchstone figure in my life as well. So Jimmy Carter appointing Andrew Young as the first black UN ambassador, as a young 8-year-old black man looking for black male role models, Andrew Young was the person. So I've always known of, I knew of Andrew Young, the UN ambassador, before I knew Andrew Young, the civil rights icon, if that makes any sense. So, just kind of knowing him growing up, I met him in 1996 when he wrote his autobiography, An Easy Burden. When I had just graduated from North Carolina Central University, and he came for a book signing, and I met him. And again, he's a member of my fraternity. So at that time, it was, anyone who's a member of a Black Greek organization understand how important it is to meet your living legends who were in the fraternity. So meeting him at that time in 1996 was a big thing. So moving to Atlanta, covering him for 25 years now, I wanted to write a book about somebody, and and kind of with the whole COVID situation in 2020, we lost John Lewis. We lost John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, and Joe Lowry within 3 months. These are 3 legends. These are 3 guys that I kind of grew up, knowing and loving. So, not to sound, morbid or anything, but I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to write a book about Andrew Young. I wanted to write a book about one of these civil rights legends that I've been knowing all my life. And the opportunity came along. He was getting to his 90th birthday, so that became a perfect timing for it. So it all kind of came together. And he agreed to do it.
And tell me about you got to tell the story when you went running to him at the car, the first time you met him, the very first time, the handshake.
The first time I met him, it was in 1996 in Durham, North Carolina. There's a bookstore called the No Bookstore. And, again, I'm interviewing him as a reporter, as a young reporter, and I challenge him. And I challenge him through my fraternities, the way we challenge people. A challenge, for those of you who don't know, is a way to let the other person know that you are a member of the organization. But for me, it was a kind of a way to show respect to him, to say that, I know he's an alpha. So my challenge to him was not to prove that he was an alpha, but to let him know that I'm an alpha and that I can one day, or I can be in your shoes, or I'm behind you in some way. So that was what that was. It was kind of a note of respect for him. And he looked at me and he smiled and he gave me the grip, and he doesn't remember any of this, but I'll never forget it. And that's kind of
You write about it. You write about it. How special that moment was.
But let me butt in there because not that fraternities and sororities are not important in college life, but in all the years I was with him, Martin Luther King, who was an alpha, never mentioned that fact. And he was so, he thought there were too many things that divided the black community anyway. And fraternity was something for college life, but he didn't like anybody to know that he had a PhD. That the closer we could get to each other and the more we could identify with the needs and the struggles of ordinary people. And that was the reason why I think SNCC really started it. We started wearing blue jeans. And at SCLC, that was the symbol of the fact that we weren't buying anything for Easter. And that for 90 days, 80,000 black folk in Birmingham only bought food and medicine. And no Easter clothes, no frills. But we demonstrated that Birmingham could not exist without the black dollar. And once they realized that, we said, but look, you're not doing so well without black folk voting either.
Could we capture that today? I mean, when you look at today's culture, is that something that you think the black community could pursue and be successful?
Well, you could, but you had to, and that was a difference between the 60s and last year, or Black Lives Matter, that things happened so fast. Everybody saw the same 9 minutes and 41 seconds all over the world. And it took us, well, we started planning for Birmingham in 1962, before Christmas. And we waited until February of '63 before we even went to Birmingham. But we studied Birmingham. We had private meetings with the ministers. Dr. King asked me to see if I could find some sensible white folks to talk to. And I said, but I don't know any white folks in Birmingham. He said, well, you get along good with white folks. Find some. There's got to be some reasonable white folk in this town. And I remembered that I'd been at a conference in Michigan, and there was a delegation from the Episcopal Church. So I went to the Episcopal Church, which was all white, and the same lady who was leading the delegation in Michigan was still there. And she introduced me to the bishop. And the bishop then started bringing business people together so that we told them what we were going to do 2 months before we did anything. We laid out the whole schedule of nonviolent demonstrations and told them what their response should be. And so there was, with a couple of months of preparation, then we were in control of both the demonstrations and the outcome.
So talk to me about Black Lives Matter and your sense of whether or not it is effective. I know you and I have spoken before about, you've warned those who are part of the movement not to fall into sloganeering, not to get caught up in that. And the defund the police slogan was one that people have used in some ways.
If you look at our adversaries, the whole right-wing campaign is taking some of the on-the-spot emotional slogans of Black Lives Matter, and that's what they're running against. I mean, nobody in Atlanta's trying to defund the police. See, and nobody in Washington. I mean, we're trying to reprogram, we're trying to rethink law enforcement. But people are taking advantage of some of our slogans and distorting them to rally a right-wing opposition.
How do they counter? How do they counter this?
Well,
if you were advising those young activists?
Well, the first place, you don't take any advice when you're mad. I mean, you really don't. But the first thing my daddy taught me, and that's what, I was 4 years old, and the Nazi party was on the corner of my house. And my daddy was explaining to me in 1936 that white supremacy is a sickness. You learned in Sunday school that God created of one blood all the nations of the earth. They don't want to believe that. They want to believe that white is better than everybody else. He said, but that's their problem. And he said, you don't get angry with sick people, and you don't argue with them. You go ahead and take care of your business, see? And is their sickness. And he took me to see, and that's the other part of the program. He took me to the movies, a segregated movie, and I'm 4 years old, but he took me to see Jesse Owens in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. And he said, now, when Jesse won his first race, Hitler walked out rather than give him his medal. He said, but that was Hitler's problem. Jesse's problem was to compete in the Olympics. And he just went on and minded his own business and won 3 more gold medals. The message that he drilled into me from childhood, 4 years old, don't get mad, get smart. Don't ever lose your temper in a fight. If you lose your temper, you're going to lose the fight.
So we've actually seen, and people have been talking about it. I mean, it was just this past weekend that Reverend Jesse Jackson weighed in on this, and it was not prompted, but he weighed in on the Will Smith, Chris Rock slap, and he commended Chris Rock for abstaining, for being, for holding back and not answering violence with violence. But he believes, and he said that there is just much too much violence in our community. How do you see the role of the nonviolent movement, the philosophy that you used so effectively in terms of passing that along today? Is that something that's even effective and resonates with the movement?
The hardest place to be nonviolent is at home. I mean, very few people can get me as upset as my wife or when he wants to, my son. See, I mean, that's part of the equation of growing up. My grandchildren, they up there, right there.
Where are they? Can you stand?
All of my grandchildren, they embarrassed. They don't.
Where are
they? They're ashamed.
Welcome. Oh, there you go. Okay. All right. All right. Sorry.
No, I'm saying that. But it is true that you have to think your way through a struggle. Any struggle. And life is a struggle. Everything about life is not supposed to be easy. And anybody that thinks it is going to be disillusioned and frustrated all their lives. You are here and put on earth with certain abilities that give you the capacity. In fact, the Bible says that God gave man dominion over the earth. And if you don't treat it right, you're going to blow it up. I mean, we've known, well, you talked about Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter negotiated with Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler that by 1980, they would have, no, it was 2000, I don't know when it was, but they had an agreement that there would be a fleet average of 30 miles per gallon by that time, and all of the motor companies agreed with it. And Ronald Reagan gets elected, and he comes back and he says, oh, you don't have to pay any attention to that. There's no such thing as global warming. See? And then I'm from New Orleans, and we know about hurricanes. And we didn't do anything about global warming, and so we've seen an increase systematically in hurricanes. We've seen all the fires in California, and now they're in Arizona, and we know better. And yet there are people who believe In fact, there's a whole political movement to try to make fun of the truth.
How do we combat that misinformation, that disinformation? How does the community arm itself from the manipulation that is occurring here with people who do not seem to be paying attention or even understanding the larger picture?
Well, one, I wish more people went to church. I mean, the one thing that you have to have some grounding in the truth. You have to know that if you drop something, there is a law of gravity, it's gonna fall. And I don't care what you say about it politically, it ain't what you think it is. And there is such a thing as truth. And Dr. King said that was one of his most often quoted, truth crushed to earth will rise again. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, for behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. And I mean, go out at night and look up at the stars and realize how insignificant we are. I mean, it's just true. And I don't care how bad you are, and I don't care how important you think Earth is. When you look at the heavens, Earth is a very small part of the reality that we live in. What's the guy's name that?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse
Yes.
Tyson. I mean, he knows what's up there.
He knows. Ernie, I want to bring you into the conversation when we talk about disinformation. And I mean, you produced this beautiful book, and you speak to the history, the very rich history and the different roles that the ambassador played. And yet here we are, and you are up against, journalism is up against academics and professors, even just teachers are up against people feeling threatened just to learn Black history, just to be exposed to it, that this is some sort of threat. Can you talk a little bit about where are we going with that? You know, how does that put this into context?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I'm a graduate of North Carolina Central University, which is a historically Black college. I cover race and culture, so I have kind of been immersed in this world for a long time, pretty all my life, you know. Like the Eddie Murphy joke, I grew up in a Black family because I'm Black. But, you know, covering this stuff all my life, you know, being involved in this all my life, it's been very tough the last 4 or 5 years as we've gotten this misinformation, as we've gotten this attack on simple, basic things that happened in history that are being attacked and challenged now. So in writing this book and in covering Ambassador Young, I'm able to, in a little way, in a small way, hopefully, kind of reclaim that history, reclaim those stories, reclaim kind of what helped us get here, in this beautiful library today. And you know, growing up, living in Atlanta and being here in Washington, D.C., these are places where Black culture is very important. And I think it's important for me as a journalist and for all of us as people who absorb culture and absorb history and understand politics to tell those stories about what's going on in Black America and to kind of reinforce what's going on. Because, you know, it's out there. It's out, you know, every day.
So what if they challenged you? What if they said, we're not going to put these in the libraries anymore? We're not going to put them in our schools because this is going to upset somebody.
They're already saying it. So what we have to do, we have to fight it. We have to, I tell people all the time about, you know, voting. You know, it's something as simple as voting. You know, people talk about, I'm not going to vote for, you know, I'm not going to vote for Biden because he's the same as Trump, or, you know, you get these arguments. But it comes down to, you know, it comes down to who we get on the Supreme Court. It comes down to who we get in our state house and state senates and who we get on our school board. So it all matters. So I think voting is very important. And, you know, telling these kind of stories is very important to kind of keep reinforcing where we came from, keep reinforcing the stories that Andrew Young is telling. And that's part of why I wanted to write the book.
But look what's happened. We focused on, it started with the Supreme Court in 1954. And then we realized that we couldn't make it with the Supreme Court without the Congress and without the presidency. And we focused on that. And we're making real progress. But in the last decade or so, and it is not an accident, somebody wrote a voting rights bill to stop us from voting, and the same bill showed up in about 40 states at the same time, and the state legislators were not prepared. They didn't even read it. Because see, the bill they voted on in Atlanta didn't arrive until the weekend. And it was something like 800 pages or something like that. It's a huge thing. And there's nobody in the Georgia state legislature that can read that fast. Nobody. See, but most of them wouldn't even try.
So do you ever just get tired, sick and tired of fighting the same battle? Did you
No.
ever think you'd be at this
No.
place? Tell me why.
Because
Is it police brutality, voting
no,
rights?
but life is hell. What's the name? Lady's name. Life ain't been no crystal stair.
That's for sure.
You know. But you're here to struggle, and it's like playing football and everybody lay down and let you run for a touchdown. You know, that's not real. Life, everything about life is a struggle. And what I was thinking of when you said, why not, I thought of a song that Bernice Reagan wrote for Ella Baker. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. You know, and you get those voices of Sweet Honey in the Rock, rocking with that, and you know everything we did singing, and the success of the movement was they could not get us angry. Being angry paralyzes your thought processes. When you get angry and frustrated, and it's everything. My wife loses her phone, and she's about to panic. I say, baby, calm down, sit down, take a deep breath, see? And if you relax, your mind will start working. And next thing you know, she remembers where the phone is. But that is one of the major struggles in life, is how to discipline yourself so that you control your environment and your environment doesn't control you.
Dr. King said to you, and you've written, you've talked about this before, that he talked about death quite a bit, and that he was prepared, and he didn't think he would make it to 40, and he told the rest of you that to be prepared for that potential as well. If you're trying to create change, be a part of change. There are people who tweet, there are people who are influencers, they use social media, but very few people talk about giving their lives for a cause. What do the young people need to do to be effective activists, to produce effective change? Do they have to be willing to make that kind kind of sacrifice?
You sure? You gonna die. Anybody here think they're not gonna die? Death is the ultimate democracy. Everybody's got to die. And you don't have anything to say about when you die, where you die, how you die. Your only choice is what is it you're willing to give your life for? And when you're willing to risk your life for others or for what you believe in, it's amazing how much you can get done. But anger and fear are cousins. And most folk who are angry are really afraid. And so anger is another aspect of cowardice.
What are they afraid of? What are they afraid of?
Life. They're afraid of themselves. They're afraid of their own emotions and their own impulses. I mean, we are free. And if we don't find some way to discipline ourselves, we become pawns in a chess game that we don't even know the rules of.
Are there some lessons out of the experiences of the civil rights movement that you feel is important, that maybe is even missed, that people are not paying attention to now? So they're not those pawns.
Yeah, I think you got to go back to we say all the time that this is a democracy. But the folk in Ukraine want to control their own lives, and they're willing to risk their lives. They are risking their lives. The folk down in Mississippi, nobody asked anybody permission. I mean, Fannie Lou Hamer decided she was going to vote. And when she decided to vote, they put her off the plantation that she had been on most of her life, for 30-some years. But she never thought of that as a sacrifice. She thought of that as being free. And I remember there was a brother, deacon in the Baptist church, that took some people down to the courthouse to register to vote, and he couldn't talk too good. And he walked up to the sheriff and had people in the back of his wagon, and they all lined up there, and he said, "What you want here, boy?" He said, I am here to register to vote. And the sheriff pulled his gun and put it right in the middle of his head. He said, "What did you say, nigga?" He said, "I said, I am here to register to vote. And if I live, I am going to vote." And I mean, just standing up to a man with a gun in the middle of your head. And the sheriff got intimidated, put his gun up, turned around and walked in. I mean, that he just wasn't able to confront the courage of a simple man who was willing to give his life at that moment in order to be able to be a registered voter. And we saw that over and over again. And we still see it. When I was elected to Congress, I thought I'd done my best. And then lo and behold, it poured down rain. It started raining at 3 o'clock in the morning on election day. I said, "Lord, why did you do this to me?" We've been working for 2 years, and here's now, black folk don't come out in the rain. And I wasted 2 years, except that when, and it rained all day till after the vote closed. And when they started counting the votes, it turned out that we had a 74% black turnout in the pouring down rain. And you see the people in South Africa after Mandela's been in jail for 30 years, and they stood in the sun, see, for hours and hours. But they got control of their country. Some control, not everything. They don't have control of the economy, but they have control of the politics. And freedom, you take freedom in steps. You don't, well, NBA basketball is going. There's certain rules to the game. If you don't want to take your shots, you can't go to Canada, and you don't develop this spirit with the team because you're worried about yourself and not your team. And so Brooklyn got kicked out.
Oh, that's wrong.
And
That's
they got the best basketball players around. And when they didn't have the spirit of brotherhood or unity, they got their asses whipped. And that's life.
All right, with that life lesson, I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. And how are we doing this, Katie? I thought we were taking note cards and handing them off. How are we doing this? While we get organized with that, I want to ask, you had your 90th birthday, and happy birthday. What do you hope? I know people talk about legacy and what you want to be remembered for in the history books. That's part of it, but what would you like for our audience tonight, maybe for your grandkids to take away when you think about legacy?
I don't think about it. I mean, I do the best I can one day at a time. I mean, and that's the truth. I really screwed up at Howard. I mean,
Tell me about Howard. We should have talked about Howard a long time ago, but Howard.
One more D and I would have flunked out instead of graduated. See? But I'm proud of those D's because I was fighting with teachers who didn't know what I knew. I mean, a white lady with 2 PhDs from the University of Chicago and the Sorbonne. And she's trying to tell me about juvenile delinquency. My high school class, a third of them went to college, a third of them went to the military, and a third of them went to jail. But it wasn't the smartest that went to college, and it wasn't the dumbest or the baddest that went to jail. It was almost like your zip code. It was your choice. It was the lot that you were given. And when I was about to flunk out, I met one of the kids that got put out with me in 3rd grade. And he had not been back to school since 3rd grade because his mama was a maid working for $1 a day plus car fare. And they had 6 kids in the family. And I said, well, I mean, I'm messing up at Howard. And he's saying, he called me all kinds of names, and said that I'm as smart as you. And if I had the chance that you have, I wouldn't fuck it up. And if I catch you in the street and realize that you didn't get a degree and help people like me, he said, we're going to fight right there. And then I realized there, but for the grace of God go I. And that, my story is that coming back from Howard, we had to stop where black folk could sleep. And there was a school at Kings Mountain that my church ran, and my parents stopped there, and I ran out to run up the mountain just because, I don't know, I'd run when I get frustrated when I was younger. And I pushed myself up to the top of the mountain to the point where I might have even lost consciousness. But when I came to myself and looked out, everything made sense. Everything was beautiful, and everything had a purpose. And it just hit me. If the trees have got a purpose, if the cows have got a purpose, if the cornfield has a purpose, whoever made all this didn't make me as the only thing with no purpose. So whoever made all of this made everything and everybody with a purpose. And all I have to do is the best that I can, one day at a time. And almost everything I've done, nobody else wanted to do. Nobody wanted to work with Martin Luther King. I mean, he'd been stabbed, he'd been bombed, he'd been in jail and sued, he'd been put in a paddy wagon in chains with a police dog and driven all night to the penitentiary. And I mean, he's 29 years old. And he was sure he was going to his death. And that's not a life that people choose lightly. And he would laugh and joke about the fact that if you haven't found something you're willing to die for, you're not fit to live anyway. And but it's the struggle that any challenge is rewarding. You don't have to win all the time. You just have to do your best.
Tell me about.
I mean, even the best baseball player, he's lucky if he bats 300. That means he misses 2/3 of the time. See, why is it that everybody wants everything to be perfect? It just never has been, and it won't be. And there's nobody here that knows what perfect is, because ain't nobody here perfect. Unless maybe you are.
No, I'm not. Far from it. Tell me, Ambassador, tell me about St. Augustine. Tell me about what.
Well, one of the questions that everybody asks me in this, what's the most important thing you've ever done in life?
Yes.
Oh, you've been a mayor, you've been a congressman, you've been a preacher, you've been this, that, and the other. And I never really thought about it until we started working on this book. And it suddenly hit me that Dr. King sent me down to St. Augustine, Florida, to stop a movement. He didn't want anybody to get killed. And he felt that if the movement got out of hand, it would stop the Civil Rights Bill from being passed. The Civil Rights Bill was on the floor of the Senate, and they were in the middle of filibustering it. He thought that if it would be better to quiet down. Well, when I went down there to calm them down, Hosea Williams, hollered when I came into church, Dr. King sent Andy Young down here to lead this march.
It's a shame.
He said, he knows how important this is. I said, Jose, he didn't send me to lead the march. He sent me to stop the march. He said, Andy, you can't stop these people from marching. They want to march. I said, nigga, you want to march. And I said, you the fool, and you want these people to get killed for nothing. So you couldn't fight in the front of the church. And so I said, well, I'll lead the march. And so I led the march down, and I figured if we get to where the corner, there were about 200 Klansmen in the middle of the march where we were marching. And they had been doing it for a long time, and just getting beat up and knocked around. So I thought that if I'd get everybody together and we pray about it, they'd come to their senses and we could go back to the church. And when I finished praying, some lady hollered, "Be not dismayed, whatever betide, God will take care of you." I said, "Oh, shit." I had a lot of experience with God in church, but this was Saturday night in St. Augustine. And they wanted to march. So the problem is that it wasn't the men. All the men were sitting in the bars and the pool halls saying, "I can't be nonviolent." I said, "How many white folks have you killed in the last few weeks?" Somebody taking advantage of your mama every day. Have you ever slapped them, or cussed them, or told them that I said, "No, you scared." But they were hiding behind this not being able to be nonviolent. So we had a few of us from SCLC, and mostly women and children. And my job was to keep anybody from getting killed or hurt. And when we went down there, I kept people on one side of the street. And I grew up with crazy white folks. They don't bother me, even in their territory. And so I decided I was going to cross over and talk to them. And I was doing well until somebody came up behind me with a blackjack or something. And I guess I got kicked around for a while. But when somebody stopped them and they picked me up, and I said, "We can't turn around now. We have to go down to the next corner." And went through the same routine again, except that this time when they swung, I twisted, I ducked. And I didn't get hit, but I kept talking. And finally there was really a great big guy, policeman. And I didn't know that then, but the police of St. Augustine were better off than the sheriff. The sheriff had deputized the Ku Klux Klan to beat us up. So this big policeman comes in and says, "You all cut this out. Leave these folk alone. Let them march through. You're going to kill somebody, and then you really will be in trouble." And we marched on through and got back, nobody hurt. And I didn't even know how much I'd been beaten up, but I didn't have a headache and I wasn't bleeding. So I wasn't worried about it. And yet, the next Saturday, this carried on for a week. And the next Saturday, the Klan had not provoked violence from us. And they decided they were going to march through the black community on a Saturday. And they were in their sheets and had their guns under there. And they really wanted a fight, because a fight in St. Augustine would have killed the Civil Rights Bill in Washington. And I didn't know what the folk were going to do, except when the Klan got in the middle of the street in Lincolnville, somebody started singing, "I love everybody. I love everybody in my heart. You can't make me doubt him because I know too much about him. I feel the love of Jesus in my heart." And I said, "Damn, these folks." And everybody started singing. And the Klan did not know what to do when people responded to their hatred with that kind of spirituality. And I think the contrast between their violence and the spirituality of these ordinary folk in St. Augustine, Florida, a week later, that Tuesday when the Senate reconvened, they passed the '64 Civil Rights Act. And it wasn't a big deal. There wasn't a lot of press there. But the press that was there got beat up with us. But that was one case where evil didn't win. And not only did it not win that week and that bill, there might be some pictures, I don't know, of that time in the book, but almost all of the young people who were there ended up as successes. I mean, the one guy in Atlanta now, he's almost my age. He left St. Augustine, came back to Howard. Then he went to the military because he didn't want to go kill anybody, so he went as a medic, and he got shot and got Purple Heart. He came back, and he started with the first little Dairy Queen in the black community. And then he moved from Dairy Queen to McDonald's, and the last I knew he had a chain of Marriott hotels. He was the one who started the movement. You can't say he did not win. So, I mean, he won in every phase of life, politically, economically, and one of the young ladies whose face was beat up, I ran into has her PhD, and she was teaching at Florida International University. All of those folk went on to do something phenomenal because they had an experience with God leading them through the valley of the shadow of death, and they feared no evil, and they've overcome. At least that part. And after the bill was signed, Dr. King came back, and the same place where they put him in jail for ordering a cup of coffee, we went in, and the lady offered him, said he wanted a cup of coffee, and she was shaking her hand and spilled it in the saucer, and she wanted to take it back. And he said, no, I like it like that. And he said, thou prepare us a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil till my coffee cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life.
Thank you.
And I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thank you. Clearly, there's a lot of emotion behind that as well. That's right. I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to try to get to as many as possible, just so you let me know when we run out of time. Okay. The Black Women's Roundtable, in essence, released a study that only 65% of Black women will vote for the Democratic candidate in the midterms. That's down from 92% of Black women in 2018. Why do you think Democrats are why do you think Democrats are losing ground with Black women, their most loyal voting bloc? Deanna Bass
So
Williams.
that number was 98 to 65?
92% of black women. That's down from 92% of black women in 2018.
Black women got so much on their mind. I don't think they have time to think about politics. They can't keep up with the ignorance that's being portrayed in the Congress day in and day out. And they get disgusted and they look out for themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that they ain't got one eye open and that they don't know what's going on. And that when the time comes that they are ready to rise up. But we can't. I mean, I really work at keeping up with the news. And it is work. But it's, you know, sometimes you just have to give up, turn on a basketball game.
Who's calling you?
No, really.
Calling you.
You do. You can't. Life
There's
is
an angry
not.
woman on that line, on your phone right now.
Life is not. Is not meant to be all work and no play. And black women know how to have fun. And they want to have fun sometimes, and they'll take a time off, but my feeling is that they're going to show up on Election Day in Georgia because you got Stacey Abrams running for governor.
That's right.
And I mean, and I have seldom seen anybody as cool and articulate and brilliant as Raphael Warnock. And he pastors the state of Georgia. And he doesn't preach to them, but his Senate seat is a teaching ministry for him. And I just don't want to give up on white folks either. It can't all be black women. And black men are so sorry. We are so sorry. See, we give up too easy. But we catch hell too, from everywhere. And there are times when the stars align and we all get together and do right. And I think that's what happened when we saw George Floyd. I mean, I wanted to jump in the television screen. And I think if I'd been there, I probably would have been killed. Because I could not have watched a man die for 9 minutes and 41 seconds. But neither could everybody else in the world. See? Now, there were about 3 or 4 cases in Minnesota similar to that. But Minnesota, in my time, was Hubert Humphrey, and it was supposed to be one of our most liberal states. It's not anymore. But I'm not sure why.
Okay. I'm going to go on to the next question. Thank you. To this one, turning the corner, today would have been Coretta Scott King's 95th birthday. You said, quote, life ain't been no crystal stair, which reminds us of Cicely Tyson, who played her in the '78 film King. What recollections do you have from that? And what would you say to Viola Davis, who has gotten criticism for her portrayal of Michelle Obama? It's a lot. It's a lot. But you can pick one.
No, I think what most people don't know, but it's in a book, but I didn't know it until I read her book after she died, that her home was burned down when she was 15. She came home from choir practice on a Wednesday evening, and her house was burned down to the ground. Her daddy was sort of like people at Mother Emmanuel Church in Charleston, because her daddy got them to kneel down and thank God that they were not home. And he took a tragedy of an empty house as a victory. And then he had her as a 15-year-old praying for the people who set fire to their house. And he was telling her that hate is too great a burden to bear. And she didn't want to carry that hatred through her life. So before she even heard of a Martin Luther King, she was being trained in nonviolence by her father. But now Daddy King was saying almost the same thing about, Daddy King used to say that he planned to meet his enemies at the cross. And that he was not going to he said, yeah, they shot my son, and a black man shot my wife sitting at the organ playing the Lord's Prayer. He said, but I hope to meet them in heaven because I want the mercy of God to prevail. And I will not let any man make me hate him, even though they killed my wife and my son. And that is the kind of character that has been a part of our community as far back as I know. And that's why we are going to prevail. I don't know how long or how it will change, but the truth of it is Martin Luther King did not know what he was doing, nor did any of the rest of us. You go out on faith, and yet it always came out right, better than we could have planned it. How can you think that you can get a Voting Rights Act out of a little town of 15,000? They got more people than that within a mile of this building. And we had almost nothing to work with. Martin Luther King never had $1 million a year to work with all the movement. I think the biggest our budget was right after he won the Nobel Prize in Selma. Our budget got up to about $600,000. Folk make that in a salary in a year. Yeah. But that's all he had to work with for a whole year, with a staff of about 45 or 50 people.
And yet you made it work. You made it work.
Somebody made it work.
Yeah. Another question. You and Dr. Robert L. Greene worked together in the Civil Rights Days with Dr. King. Please share a scary and a fond memory of the three of you working together.
Well, all of us were in our 30s. And so we really had a good time. And the kind of things that I think of, that very simple. Everybody riding around Mississippi, and everybody was hungry. And finally, Dr. King said, pull over. There's something I got to have something to eat. And he pulls over, we pull over in front of one of these little country stores on the road in Mississippi, and there's nothing in there that you look like you want to eat, that I wanted to eat, except there's a big 2-gallon jar of pig feet. And Martin says, how much is that? And he says, they're 15 cents a piece. He said, no, how much is the whole jar? And he buys the whole jar of pig feet. See, and and some wax paper, and they sit out in the sun and eat pig feet. And then, knowing I didn't eat the pig feet, because I knew we were going to a catfish farm, and they had a whole platter of catfish waiting for us. See, and so but he got hungry for something, and there were fun times like that. Bob Greene was crazy. He was certifiably insane on the road to in Mississippi. You were still crazy. I said you. And I said, I know you were there. And here we are marching through this little town in Mississippi, and the railroad track, the train is coming, and the marchers are marching across the track. And I see Bob Greene cutting across the field. The next thing I know, he has jumped up on the in the railroad car, and shaking his fist at the hands in the face of the engineer, telling him to stop this damn train. See, and I said, damn, he's gonna get us all killed. See, I think he stopped for trains, but he made the train stop so the marchers could go through. See? And that's the kind of temporary insanity. Now, the reason he was down there, though, was that I thought that we needed to get some of these professors from Ivy League. He was from Michigan State, the dean of the College of Urban Studies. And I said, you need to come on down here with us and take a sabbatical. And then you can take this back to Michigan State and give them some lessons from the real world. And he did that, and now he and his family have retired here in the Washington area. But he will tell you that the best days of his life were the days that he spent with us in Mississippi.
That's right. Is that right? All right.
But the other thing is that he was a part of a group of educators who had been fired from their teaching jobs, Septimus Clark, for teaching people how to pass the literacy tests. And he was part of a group that organized everybody from Charleston, South Carolina, on over to Houston, Texas. And the people that they taught to read and write and got registered to vote, one of the first teachers that we worked with was Clyburn, mother and father. And so we're seeing the second and third generation of those people that we worked with in the 60s. We're seeing them. We're seeing that the movement continues. And it doesn't have to be marching. I mean, Benny Thompson is doing more as the chair of that committee. And he doesn't have to do it your way or my way. He's cornering, well, I don't know. He's doing right.
All right. He's doing right. I'm sorry that we're going to have to wrap that because it's, I mean, we could go on, and I know that you'll be signing books, so there'll be some opportunity to continue. Ernie, I want to ask you, but before this, this is a statement, not a question. You will be coming out with, you've come out with this book, but there are many others who still we need to learn about and know about. And
Yeah, I mean,
we'll be looking to you for that.
Well, let's hope so. But yeah, Andrew Young is just one of our many leaders and great American human figures that we need to know about. And there's so many others whose names we don't know. Mr. Green, whose name I didn't know. So there are many stories out there to tell. So hopefully, you guys will start with this one, The Many Lives of Andrew Young, and understand his life. And what I, if I can just be very quickly, what I, as a journalist, you kind of want to create a narrative. I see my great mentor, Juan Williams, is here. And you want to create a narrative. And as you can tell with his stories that he's telling, he knows so much about so many different things. So what I wanted to do with the book was kind of break his life into all these 10 different parts, the many lives. So, you think about the fact that he was born in the Deep South 90 years ago. He went to Howard University right here in D.C. He became a preacher. A lot of people don't know that. He became a preacher. He left that to become a civil rights icon, working with Martin Luther King Jr. He left that to become a U.S. Member of the House of Representatives. He left that to become a UN ambassador. He left that to become the mayor of Atlanta. So there's so many things that he has done in his life. Each of these parts can be a book unto itself. So, as a journalist and as a writer, I had to kind of break that stuff down and to create these many lives. So I think if you read the book, you'll understand who he is and kind of get a glimpse as to who he is. And I think one of the most important things that he said about the book was that, he wrote his autobiography in 1995, and he talks about his grandchildren, and he talks about how this book, at another signing that we had, how this book is very accessible. And it's a coffee table book, and you can put it down, and you can read it. You can read it over a long period of time, or you can read it over a quick period of time, different than reading an autobiography. So I think it's a book that's very accessible, has tons and tons of photographs of him, even as a baby, which is very rare in this instance. So I think people will like it.
Yeah,
And more to
it's
come.
Wonderful. Good. Thank you. And so the final statement that we have from someone in the audience, Ambassador Young, from all of us in communities around this country, this world, thank God for you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Unless you have some